Alex with Alex Nutrition, and who I have with me here is Theresa Nesbitt. This is actually take two because the tape did not take the recording. But this is take two with Theresa Nesbitt over here. And what we have is the author of Evolutionary Eating, Theresa Nesbitt, MD. And what I wanted to bring her on our show for today was actually talk to her about why grain is bad. The reason being is that I had a little bit of conflict on the internet when I posted a picture about why grain is bad. And I brought Theresa here today to teach us why grain actually is bad and what we can do about it.
Well, I guess the first thing I would teach you is that when you say grain is bad, you're going to get an instant, intense reaction to that because many people, grain is the major part of their diet and they feel like they're doing fine and it doesn't cost them much and it's convenient and so they don't want you telling them that there might be a problem with that. The other problem is grain has a number of effects that are potentially bad, and they aren't bad in every person, and they manifest themselves in different ways. So the first thing we can start off with is probably grain isn't good. Can we start with that one?
Yes.
And the reason that grain isn't good, so people say it's like whole grain goodness and I eat whole wheat bread, is that one, the fiber that we're seeing, the insoluble fiber or the roughage from all of these whole grains do two things. They, one, aren't really helping our gut health that we thought before. It's the soluble fiber that comes in fruits and vegetables that feed our good gut bacteria that keep our gut healthy. Those are good for us. The ones that scrub out the lining of your gut, we don't really need those. That's sort of like saying you need to scrub your eye with a washcloth before you put a contact lens on it, just to make sure that it's clean. So it's a delicate lining in there, and it doesn't really need roughage or bulk to move along. What it needs is a healthy gut motility that keeps things moving along the right way. And because I'm kind of the queen of magnesium, we need adequate amount of magnesium in our diet to balance out the calcium.
A lot of people have been on the magnesium thing.
I'm really big on that, but that will be a talk for another day.
Video.
Okay, so basically is you're going to have people who are saying, I'm eating this whole grain, like whole grain bread or cereal, or I'm eating low fat, so I'm eating pasta or bagels or things like that, and it's lower calorie. And that means it's good. And it doesn't really mean it's good. Human beings don't need starch or carbohydrates to build their body. We use that for fuel. So,
energy source for our body.
Right. And so is it useful to have an energy source like carbohydrates? Sure. What we need is to make sure in our diet, I always say that you get three things out of your diet. So what goes in your mouth isn't what goes in your body. What goes in your mouth gets digested in the tube that's your digestive system, and it may or may not get absorbed into your body for your cells to use. And everything that goes into your body becomes one of three things. It either becomes a building block that can be used for tissue growth, maintenance, reactions and things like that to keep things moving along, a building block. Fuel, which we need plenty of, but building blocks can be burned as fuel. It's just they're very expensive. And what I call rubbish. Rubbish is stuff that, it's not the same as waste. Waste stays on the inside and exits.
Shoots out.
Right. But rubbish is things that the body absorbs thinking it might be useful, and then when it's examined, they go, no, we don't really know what to do with this. We can't turn it into a building block, and we can't turn it into fuel. So it gets stored until the liver or the kidneys are able to detox something. It's sort of like a toxin. I call it rubbish because it doesn't need to be poisonous, but it's not useful. And it takes up valuable resources, holding on to it, and also being able to excrete it and get rid of it. So in an ideal diet, we want to be looking as like, you have high quality building blocks, enough of them, and not spend too much money. The right amount of fuel for the amount that you're burning. So we really need to think of those carbohydrates, which would be like grain, as fuel. And as a country right now, certainly, we tend to be over-fueled and undernourished.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, we're sitting at work, sitting at desks all day, So we're not, like back in nature, the Paleolithic age, we run around hunting, gathering, everything. Mm-hmm. We don't need as much of that energy from the glucose and everything as we previously
and there wouldn't
did.
have been much carbohydrates
Mm-hmm.
because it is until we had agriculture about 10,000 years ago. So humans have been around for millions of years.
Mm-hmm.
But agriculture, or the cultivating of grain, which is a grass.
Mm-hmm.
Grain is just seeds from grass. And as we get more proficient in the laboratory in making cheap available food,
Mm-hmm.
we have made the grass turn into a lot less leaf and a lot more seed.
Mm-hmm.
But the seeds don't go back to the ground to make more grass.
Gathering the seeds.
We're gathering the seeds up and eating them. And wheat, which is the most concerning grain that we have right now, and really the one that you're talking about, in the sort of move to feed the world or the green revolution, we changed the wheat. We actually changed the number of chromosomes in it. It's not GMO, but it's hybridized. And they took these tall ones that could bend and break, and they're all short and very dense, and they have a big seed pod in them, so you're making a lot more grain. But this grain seems to be, the seeds from this seem to be causing more problems in more people with damaging the gut or creating inflammation when things go across the gut wall. Yeah. Leaky gut is, if grains can be inflammatory, the gut lining, so your digestive system starts at your mouth and ends at the other end, at the anus, and it's just a long tube. So if you look like this, it's like a donut, and the air in the middle, you think that that's the inside, but it's really still the outside.
It's just the outside. It's
just
like,
if you looked through this, you'd see that air is really the outside.
Stretch us out.
Right. So what you eat doesn't really count. Your diet is what crosses the intestine and the small intestine and gets into your body. And you want nutrients to get in, and then you also want stuff that's not nutrients, like bacteria, broken down products that shouldn't be there, toxins, and also not fully digested food. So gluten and sometimes poorly broken down food, they go through these holes that develop when the gut gets inflamed.
Okay.
And because grains are inflammatory for a lot of people, instead of being sealed, they can develop these gaps where things can go across. So I explain it to people like it's row houses or townhouses. Now, when you look, you can see that there's streets on either end, but you have this long row where the walls are shared and you have windows and doors. And if you wanted to get across to the other side, you'd have to go up and knock on a door and have someone escort you through the house to the other side. And what today's grains do by being inflammatory, they're very impatient. So this is the border patrol, and they throw all these rocks at the windows.
Barging in.
Yes, creating holes. And once those holes are created, it's not just gluten that crosses. Anything can go across.
So now you're letting the toxins that your body would normally kick out, you're letting those toxins build up in your body. Now, does that have something to do with why people are getting all these allergic reactions like that these days? Like things that they once were able to eat, now, hey, guess what? You can't eat fish, you can't eat gluten.
Allergies are always to a protein, but we tend to divide foods and say that's a protein or that's a carbohydrate or that's a fat. Whereas in nature, really, food is a combination of those things. So a grain is mostly carbohydrate, but it does have some protein, and the protein in wheat and barley is gluten. Okay. And so that gluten as a protein is actually going to cause problems for a lot of people if it's in the wrong place. But now we're seeing it's going into the wrong place a lot more often, and that's because the grain itself can be damaging to the gut. But the first thing, as I said, that we need to look at is it isn't really necessary to eat grain. That is the first thing that people are doing, is they think that it's good for them because it's low in fat.
The folic acid they say you get from it, or what is it, iodine in it? Or no, they took the iodine out now.
Yes, it's bromine in the baked goods and things. But we call those, food can be enriched or fortified.
Yes.
So enriched means what they strip out, they try and put back in, but it doesn't have to be an equivalent substitute. So you can take out, so you could say, I would be enriched if, or you would be enriched if you gave me $50 and I gave you back 50 cents.
There you go, thanks.
So now you're enriched by 50 cents. So it really isn't a good trade about it.
Yeah, it's not a
Then
fair
fortified
trade-off.
means putting something in a food that wouldn't have been there
Normally.
normally. So we're trying to put these things into foods to prevent deficiency diseases, when what we really need to look at is why, at this time on earth where food is so abundant and available and we have all this wealth, why are we having deficiency diseases?
And then these are synthetic ingredients that they're putting in
Yes,
to our food
mostly
as well.
they're synthetic.
So we're not absorbing them as a whole food ingredient would be.
And again, there's a very wide range of difference between people. And even in an individual person, depending on what you eat it with, it might be absorbed better or worse. So the synthetic versions, they are obviously less expensive and they're made from inorganic food. So from like rocks and things like that, a lot of times tar, which is actually organic, but it's not a food source, it's not a living food source. So we have moved towards looking at supplements and turning them into substitutes. But grains are fuel. So there's some big problems with grains. First of all, anyone who's concerned about their weight, because it's almost pure carbohydrate, and it actually causes your insulin to go up faster than eating sugar, and the more refined it is, and of course they're all this processed foods really refined, it makes your insulin go up really fast.
When your insulin goes up really fast, I was seeing something the other day that even if your glucose drops down after that, your insulin takes a lot longer to drop off than actually your blood glucose level.
Yeah, and do you know what happens when your blood glucose starts to drop off but your insulin is still high?
You get lazy?
No, you're hungry.
You're hungry?
You're really hungry because your body is like saying one, insulin is a fat storage mode. When we have insulin hanging around, then you can't burn fat as fuel. So that would be great. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to eat, store as fat, and then when we're doing things, we're burning fat. But if you have insulin present in your blood, it basically locks down fat stores. So you have to burn the sugar in your blood. And that's what you were just saying. So the sugar will start to drop down, but your cells are still going to need fuel, because everything shuts down without fuel. So your cells will start to send text messages to your brain. Eat, right. And so that is why we find things like eating a strategy that you would think, oh, well, if the restaurant so generously and kindly gives you bread, or if you go to a Mexican restaurant, to tortilla chips before your meal, it's because they don't want you to go hungry. But the reality is they do that is you eat more after you eat the bread. So the bread stimulates your appetite. It has a counter effect by stimulating the insulin. I don't think anybody's
ever thought about that before, saying, oh, we're going to give you bread, but don't worry.
So you're more likely to eat dessert.
You'll be hungrier afterwards.
Well, and you're more likely to eat dessert and then even eat later on in the evening.
Mom's always like, don't fill up on bread before dinner.
And, we have totally changed breakfast. So we sort of demonized the old traditional bacon and eggs breakfast, which was, caused all this hardening of the arteries. Back at the time when people didn't have heart attacks. So we said that fat goes straight to your arteries. And now we know that we got very confused about fats. And that's a whole nother conversation. But it depends on what fats that you're having and what they're combined with. But natural fats are good. The solid saturated fats that are caused by taking oils, which come from grain, like soybean oil, corn oil, in the lab, they make them solid by hydrogenating them. So those are the saturated fats that are used in all the studies because they are much cheaper than the saturated fats. So it's kind of like it's a flawed study then. Saturated fats in natural things like coconut oil or avocados have, and even butter, even if it comes from the animal fats, if the animal was eating a natural diet of grass. So the fat that they had, so when we used to use things, they would call it, like lard comes from pigs, and tallow. So those were used to cook foods and enrich them. They are bad for you if the animal's eating a bad diet because their fat is a reflection of what they ate. But in traditional diets, those saturated fats didn't cause any problems with heart disease or inflammation.
A lot of those toxins get stored in their fats then that they're eating from their diet then, right?
Yes.
So
a lot of times people think it's like the liver, so, my most superfood, I guess that you call it. But humans don't like foods that they haven't had before. So, again, each generation is becoming raised more and more on kibble.
Mhm.
That's what I call what the food we eat now, because it takes a cheap starch that's subsidized. You process it so it dissolves in your mouth. It's
Mhm. basically
basically baby food, so you can eat it really quick. You don't have to chew and swallow. You just basically put it in your mouth and it's gone.
Mhm.
That encourages you to eat more and eat faster and buy more food. So these foods that we're eating right now, the starch that's got chemicals on it, it tricks our brain. It's a forgery. So it looks like food, it tastes like food, it fills your tummy and makes you feel good.
Doesn't give you any of the nutrients.
But it doesn't give you the nutrients, even if they put these packaged supplemental
Mhm.
fortification nutrients, because they're not getting into our cells where we need them. And that drives your appetite.
And we're not getting all of them in a bundle like in nature, you know.
Right.
A piece of fruit or a potato has certain things all combined in it that work together with each other to help in your system.
Right. So potatoes, or my total favorite, sweet potatoes,
Mhm.
which have even less of an insulin response. So people say, it's like, well, what about potatoes? Well, potatoes and fruit kind of go along with, like, are you struggling with your weight?
Mhm.
So if you're struggling with your weight, you probably need to go back on carbohydrates, because it's going to make that insulin, or confining them
Mhm.
to small areas of time. But we don't need carbohydrates for building blocks.
Mhm.
It's a useful form of fuel.
Mhm.
But for people who are insulin resistant because they've been eating these over time, they need to probably wean away for a while so that they can get that insulin to drop down to zero and they can burn their fat stores. So, of course, and you've been a trainer and I've been a trainer, as we go through, everyone's like, well, what about the 6 small meals? And what that is designed to do is think that we can control what our body needs better than what our body already knows. So our body, like any animals, has to know how much to eat.
Yeah.
Just like it has to know how much to breathe.
Mhm.
So if your needs for oxygen go up, like because you're
Take
running,
a deeper gas
then you
to
might
air.
be breathe faster and deeper. When you're burning more calories, by expending
You
them,
need more
then you
calories.
would take in more. So why are we taking in so many now when we don't need it? And I say it's because we have asthma of the appetite. So we're eating inappropriately for our needs because we've messed around too much with our weight regulating mechanism. So that's supposed to last and tell us how much to eat over a whole lifetime. Every animal, it needs to be there, like your blood pressure, like your breathing. It's a physiologic response. So it isn't just that food is there. We do have a default to overeat rather than undereat because starvation was such a threat. But this highly carbohydrate-rich diet, that would never have been available in nature. So if you look until agriculture, which started 10,000 years ago, which is where grain came from, and people were hardworking, so they needed the fuel. I always use like Michael Phelps, the swimmer. He can eat 10,000 calories, which is actually kind of hard to do.
Woo.
And people think it's because he's exercising, by
Yeah.
swimming. But it's actually because he's in a pool that's cold. Maintaining your body temperature, which is something we used to
Takes
have
a
to
lot
do
of calories to
before we
keep
had
it hot.
these, we had, down coats
Yep.
and central heating and things like that, where we didn't need to worry about keeping warm. But people did need to, they needed
Long
those
time.
calories. Not a long time ago. We've only had
Well, yeah, I
electricity
guess
for
that's true,
100
yeah.
years. So technology,
Feels like a long time ago.
it's a long time to any individual, but that's kind of the whole evolutionary approach is our genes haven't changed as fast. We haven't evolved. We evolved a long time ago into the species that's most adaptable. So we could go all over the whole earth and basically exploit the foods that were available. So you could eat an all basically vegetarian diet and do really, really
like
well.
A fruit diet.
Or you could live, in the Arctic and where no plant foods
Fish
grow.
and fat from
So you're
fish.
not eating, you're eating a complete animal-based diet. And people will say, well, you have to have some vegetables. And I said, well, the reality is if you eat every part of the animal, we're an animal. So the building parts of animals are in other animals. But they eat other things. They don't just
livers,
eat muscles.
the kidneys,
yes.
the hearts, the
Everything.
brains.
Yes.
Everything, all the
is,
nutrients that animal has
Right.
taken from his natural
Right.
spot, now you're bringing inside yourself.
And they eat eggs, from a lot of species, and eggs, that has to contain all the nutrients
Yep.
needed to grow another animal. So an animal-based diet tends to be nutrient dense, so you need just a little bit of it, but it's very expensive. It was expensive in nature too, so we could get these extra fuels, but we never were able to predict that we would be doing all these things to the food supply to make this starch so cheap and readily available. And we look at what we see in front of us, which seems like a whole variety of these products, and we don't see that we're eating like the poorest people in the history of civilization.
Like, I mean, like what, back in Rome they used to eat grain and everything when they had their downfall.
Well, yes, it was bread in circuses.
Let's feed the poor the grain.
Yes, first there was an original form of subsidy. So for the emperors to get elected again, then they would give them grain, and then the people got that. Even that wasn't enough, and so then they baked the bread. And at the end of the Roman Empire, nobody even had kitchens. They all came and they were having the gladiator fights, which is sort of like cable television, and the
distractions,
all these distractions. But it is like, well, not while I'm here. You just re-elect me, and I'll let the next guy worry about it.
Sounds like too much like today.
It is. Yes, history does repeat itself.
So you must learn from it.
Well, you could say that. But only really individuals learn, because we keep repeating ourselves because we are still human. So in a given environment, we will behave basically the same sort of way.
Instincts.
So we need to realize that built into our brain and into our genes is a complete ability to forage, to find a diet that's really, really works for us. So when you say to people that grain is bad, that's a big threat to them, because what else are they going to eat? So the first step is really to entertain the idea that there's other things to eat.
There's other food out there.
The second step, which is, people go into all these testings, well, I don't have a problem with this and I don't have a problem with that, is to understand that a lot of the problems that we see with grain might take years to accumulate, but they can be very serious. So if you're becoming more inflamed over time, you're looking towards, chronic pain, digestive issues, and even more important, they were seeing is it really seems to have a toxic effect on the nervous system. So we're seeing that people develop problems with their brains or with their nerves. So Alzheimer's, other thinking problems, confusion, maybe some of these soft neurologic diseases. We don't know, which we are not understanding. Things like, why is there these increases?
We don't know where they're stemming from exactly.
We don't know where they're stemming from. And one of the things that I said that happened to me is, this is why I tell people to do the elimination diet. Because you might feel like, I'm doing great, I feel good, I don't need to, so why should I take a test, or why should I do an elimination challenge? I work a lot in Ireland, and they have a lot bigger problem with the gluten sensitivities there. So while there, I went for probably 6 weeks without eating any gluten at all. Not because I was trying, but just it wasn't in what we were making, because the people around me couldn't eat it at all, so I wasn't eating it either. And then I went to a cooking, foraging class in the south of Ireland, and they had a wood-burning pizza oven, and I had 3 pieces of pizza, and I got a really scratchy throat, a headache. I felt like I was getting sick. And everyone started laughing at me and said it was the gluten. I'm like, oh, no, I don't have a problem with gluten. You have a problem with gluten. I'm fine. And they're like, well, you wait and see what happens. See tomorrow if you still have your cold.
Yep.
And I didn't have my cold. And in fact, when I went off of it, I'd see every time that I go back and have it again that I get a feeling
3 minutes.
Of feeling sick. I actually feel like I have a hangover. So what I recommend to everyone to do to find out if they might be better off with or without grains is to do a grain-free challenge test. So you can't have any for 3 weeks. If you have even a little bit, it can alter what's going on in your intestine. It sort of throws the results completely off. Allow your gut to fully heal, get it all out of your system, completely without, for 3 weeks. And then the most important part is the re-challenge. So then eat a big pasta, cereal, cake, cookies, whatever it is.
See how you react
and
to
see how do you feel. Now for me, like I said, is I feel like I have a hangover, and that's actually how I look at wheat products right now. Is I sometimes will still have them and know that I will pay the price. And if it was really, really good, it was worth it. But there's no way I'm going to be eating these.
Moderation.
Yes.
I think you're the one that taught me the 80-20 rule. Just keep it in moderation.
Moderation is good. There are going to be people who find, particularly over time, they might go to 80-20 and then move away from it because it isn't working out for them. But the only way to find out is to give it a try for yourself and to stay informed. So I think you're really helping your viewers by saying there's this real concern with what grain is doing, is that, and you're just trying to help make them aware.
You guys might not be aware of it,
but you're not going to be able to feed them. These are decisions that they have to make on their own.
Everyone's got to change for themselves.
And they have to change for themselves. And all that we can do to help them change is to give them information that's personally meaningful and relevant to them. A reason why they might want to consider this. So I think that you're doing the right thing, and we have lots more areas of nutrition and real food and things like that to explore. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you, Theresa, and thank you for joining us here today with Alex Nutrition. If you want to check out our book, a few other simple things you could do to not get fat and how to eat the old evolutionary way. So thank you, Theresa. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll be back with some more videos sometime soon if Theresa would be so grateful to bless us with her presence again.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Theresa.
As always.
Have a good one.
Bye.
You see that little button below that says subscribe? Well, click it if you like my video.